Can you kind of pull back the curtain on autism and stuff like that? Because that's something that I haven't experienced firsthand and things, but it's become such a topic over in our culture over the past maybe 5 to 10 years, especially, I would say. Like, it's becoming more on the forefront of conversations. And I mean, this is not something that just developed overnight. This has probably been going on for hundreds of years, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't have a label for it, or
Well, I
how's all
mean,
that?
if you think back 100 years ago, you had the weird kid, or you had the slow kid, or even they just didn't know as much as they do now. And even now, there's so much that they don't know. But in my son's instance, and autism is a spectrum. You have your low functioning end, your high functioning end, and everything in between. But I have yet to talk to a parent that has said, my child is like this to a T. It just doesn't happen because there's so many. You see the puzzle piece for autism, and it's each kid is a different piece of that puzzle.
Is that the meaning behind that symbol? I didn't know that.
Yeah, because it's just so different. You're never going to find two puzzle pieces that are exactly the same.
So there's not a textbook diagnosis that will cover everything, kind of thing. Got
And
it.
it is really difficult to get a diagnosis. I mean, we struggled for years to get him a diagnosis. And we didn't even know what was going on. We just knew that he was struggling with something. And he is very smart. He's off the charts for his, IQ and analytical thinking, but he's very literal. So, back when he was younger, he could kind of fit in better. And then as he got into 5th, 6th, 7th grade, then it's, oh, well, you can't sit with us because you're not wearing, what we want you to wear. And that might be a joke, but he thought it was, it was, he can't sit there, period. Or, oh, no, you can't do this unless,
Wow.
So the literal side of it and breaking into what's kids being kids and what's okay and what's not, that's difficult. And really, as he goes, into middle school and high school, that's where you're starting to see a divide, and you notice the things and you look back and you think, well, if only I would have done this different, or if only I would have known, or, and that'll just get you every time, I think.
It almost becomes this loop, right? Like, because you start analyzing all your past experiences and like how you raised them and things like that, and I can see how that one could fall into that.
Yeah, I think Facebook memories might be the worst, because just today I was going through and I was reading something that I was frustrated, because I spent so much time trying to tell him to get dressed and get him in the car. And then by the time I got to school, I literally had to drag him out of the car and take him in, to preschool when he's 4 years old. Well, looking back on that, now I know he was on, sensory overload, and he just couldn't process it. So his whole way to, kind of stop that mindset was just to shut down and say no and cry. So looking back on it, should I have drug him out of the car that day? Probably not, and I probably wouldn't have. But as a frustrated, mother, my husband was on a boat and I was just trying to make it work.
Right.
So, you have the hindsight thing where you really have to learn not to kick yourself.
Yeah.
So,
And would you say a lot of parents of autistic children probably do that? They beat themselves up too much?
I think so. I was in a support group for a while, and it was I then went into a virtual support group, and it was a little bit better because I could find more. There was just,
Larger
more.
network.
It was, yeah. So I think that's the general consensus. Yeah, anytime, no parent wants to see their kids struggling or something, going on with their kids.
Yeah.
So.
And so I do know someone that has autism, and it was another family friend of ours, and so it was tough going through the high school years and stuff like that. But he, like you're saying, it's almost like genius level analytical thought because now he's like a game developer and stuff like that. And so he found his niche. Like he was one of those kids growing up that, within an hour he can master a video game or whatever. I don't understand that because I'm not a video game player and things like that. But I hear a common theme amongst autism is that they're almost kind of like borderline geniuses because they're just using a different part of the brain. Is that right?
I don't know if it's so much a different part of the brain, but I know that in my son's case, he's got a lot of that frontal lobe. He also has a TBI, which he just got a couple years ago. So
what's TBI mean?
A traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
That's, yeah. So, but part of that was the impulsiveness from the autism where you don't kind of slow down and think things through. And it ended up with him getting a brain injury. So we're also fighting that. So it's difficult for me to be able to separate,
Right.
certain things. But I have read that they're starting to hire these, younger kids coming out of high school that, have autism, but also focus on, like you said, the technical stuff. And because they'll grab a hold of something and they fixate on it and they don't stop until it's done. So, I mean, I don't think I've met a child that, had the autism diagnosis that wasn't that way, where they have their certain things that are just theirs and they grab a hold of it and that's all they want to do. Their whole life becomes about that. So, yeah.
Wow. And so what things in his world does he fixate on?
Well, sports. Basketball was huge, but for him, one of his fixations is fitting in and being the cool kid, which is kind of it's anti everything that you hear because, being social and wanting to be social and have that aspect, it just usually doesn't happen. So the fact that that's one of the things that he craves and fixates on, then, that's why it was so difficult for us to get him a diagnosis and get him help and figure out what was really going on. But yeah, I think that's in sports, any football game that comes on, any basketball game that comes on. I mean, he can tell you who was number, 6 on the Trojans in 2007,
So his memory is phenomenal.
Numbers is his thing. Yeah.
Interesting.